What's up, everybody? Let's talk Jets radio. Quick video here looking at the salary cap for the upcoming 2023 season. Today it was announced the salary cap is going to be at $228 million, which currently puts the Jets almost $3 million over the cap. Still not a huge reason to panic, only because you look at 2024. Right now, the Jets are slated to have $112 million in cap space, which I'll show you in a little bit. I mean, that could go upwards to 150 to $160 million if you do ultimately part with guys next year like C.J. Mosley, Laken Tomlinson, possibly John Franklin Myers, C.J. Uzama, Tyler Conklin, and players like that. Unfortunately for this year, there's not a whole lot of flexibility because a lot of those contracts have a lot of dead money tied to it, and they don't really result in a ton of cap savings, whether you do it pre-June 1st or even post-June 1st. Mosley's the only one that changes a little bit. Everybody else is relatively the same. So I think Mosley's going to be here. Again, he's kind of the heart and soul of the defense, one of the team captains. I don't think he's going anywhere. Tomlinson, you're locked into for this year. I don't know why I put that on trade. You're locked into Tomlinson for this year. Carl Lawson is interesting because he's a good player, good locker room guy. He's only 28 years old, but he's also had 3 major knee injuries so far, and he just hasn't lived up to the contract. He's not a $15 million a year player, and he's on the last year of his contract. If there's a way that they can restructure and rework the deal, maybe even give him another year or two, but with a lesser cap number, I'd be perfectly fine with that. But as things stand right now, I'm not sure the Jets can afford to pay $15 million a year for Carl Lawson after investing a first-round pick in Jermaine Johnson and possibly looking to pay a quarterback as well. DJ Reed lived up to his contract. He's not going anywhere. JFM is interesting because they could save a little over $5 million by cutting him, but they also take a $7 million cap hit or dead money hit if they release him. And I don't really think you're going to find anybody that can produce what JFM does, as well as his versatility, being able to play inside and outside, for that $5 million. So I feel like JFM's probably going to be here next year as well, especially with the way that Saleh rotates all his defensive linemen. Dwayne Brown's a player to monitor, just whether or not he actually decides to play next year. Corey Davis, I think, is definitely gone. I could definitely see Joe Douglas taking that $10.5 million that he's supposed to make, pairing it with the $5 million that they can save from cutting Berrios, and investing, another $14 or $15 million in a prominent receiver to pair opposite Garrett Wilson. Uzama, he's locked in for this year. Jordan Whitehead, they have some flexibility to cut. They could save a little over $7 million by cutting him, with only about a $3 million dead money hit. Unfortunately, then you'd be searching for 2 safeties instead of just 1, so I don't think Jordan Whitehead's going to go anywhere. Quinnen Williams right now, 50-year option, he's supposed to make about $9.5 million. I would love to see him get restructured, especially if they could do it in a way where those big money hits, he's probably going to make somewhere, around 20 to 25 million per year. If they can find a way to do it where those, big cap numbers come into play next year and beyond, I'd be fine with that. He's a relatively young player, and he's definitely earned the contract. He's one of the best players in the league, so you want to keep guys like that in the fold. But they do need to find ways, I think, to create some cap room this year, especially if they are going for a veteran quarterback and they are trying to win now. I think they do need to free up some room. Quinnen Williams, again, however they could structure that contract, you got to keep a player like him in the fold. Tyler Conklin, he's stuck for this year. Berrios, like I said, I think he's gone. Becton, he's locked in for the final year of his rookie contract, all guaranteed. Ashton Davis, you could save about $3 million by cutting him. So ultimately, again, you're looking at probably Carl Lawson, Corey Davis, Braxton Berrios, and Ashton Davis. That puts you at about $30 million in cap space. Depending on what quarterback you get, right now, Derek Carr, if you're trading for him, he's supposed to make about $30 million next year. I think Aaron Rodgers' cap hit for next year is only about $15 million. So, something to monitor there. And then, if you have to actually sign a quarterback, if you're not able to get Carr via trade or Rodgers via trade, are you signing a Jimmy G or a Tannehill, and for how much? But again, going to next year, I think that's where you have some optimism that Joe Douglas can maneuver some things this year, maybe even restructure a player like DJ Reed, add another year or 2 to his contract if you believe he's a long-term piece. But again, if you're supposed to be a win-now team, you need to find ways to have the resources to be able to invest around whatever quarterback you're ultimately going to get. And because they have so much space into 2024, I think they can afford to do that. And you look at the calculator just going into 2024 really quick. Guys like Tomlinson probably gone, JFM probably gone. I don't think Dwayne Brown's still going to be playing. Uzama, Conklin. just those 5 players alone put you at over $150 million in cap space for next year. So as far as a Quinnen Williams restructure, as far as paying an Aaron Rodgers or a Carr or whoever your quarterback is, the Jets can easily afford to do it. It's just a matter of how they have to or how they can structure those contracts in 2023 to get them to 2024. And even if they are taking big hits with Quinnen Williams and Rodgers or whoever, they're still going to have plenty of cap space left over to be able to invest around those guys. And in particular, it helps because you have at least one dominant draft class and another draft class with AVT, Elijah Moore, the Michael Carters, that still have some productive players in it. That's ultimately the time, I think, to go all in, to spend some big money, and to try to invest in a winner. So that's why I'm all in on Rodgers. You have some young players that are going to be relatively cheap for the next 2 to 3 years. You've got plenty of cap flexibility in 2024 and beyond. So if I'm Joe Douglas, obviously with my job on the line, kind of going into this year on the hot seat, I'm doing whatever I can to get the very best quarterback. For me, that's Aaron Rodgers. The draft picks, the cap space, that's irrelevant because there's clearly ways that they could structure some of these things and ultimately make it work. So the last thing I'm going to show is the free agents that are coming up for the Jets. The only guy that I think really stands out as far as, I don't want to say a must resign, but somebody that they really need to resign, I think, is Connor McGovern, just for some stability on the offensive line. If you do have AVT and Tomlinson as your 2 guards next year, he's got familiarity with both those players. He's been pretty solid in his 3 years with the Jets. Nothing spectacular, but he's a solid, consistent player and just another hole that you wouldn't have to worry about filling. So I'd like to see McGovern back on possibly a 1 or 2 year contract. Feeney you can bring back if you want to have some depth. Joyner I'd be okay with as depth as well, but I'm not bringing him back as a starter. George Fant is interesting because, an offseason ago, you could have made the case that he deserved a contract extension. He was dominant when he had to fill in for Becton at left tackle. Hasn't done so great on the right side. He's only 31 years old. He played through some injuries last year. Would you consider bringing him back, on a 1 or 2 year contract? For me, he's pretty athletic. I thought he did a really good job year 2 when he had to fill in. So, that's somebody I would keep an eye on. Also a pretty good locker room leader. Quincy Williams, I'd love to see him back, and I think he's motivated to come back, especially if Quinnen returns to the Jets. But I do think there's going to be a market for him as a free agent. And everyone other than that, Sheldon Rankins, you could possibly throw some money to. But I do think the defensive line might be a position you have to go a little bit cheaper on with some of those, those second string guys. Even though Saleh rotates everybody in there, I don't know if you can afford to pay Sheldon Rankins, $6 to $8 million. Quan Alexander, his first fully healthy season in about 5 or 6 years. Do you feel comfortable giving him a 2 or 3 year contract off of that? Herbig, I thought he filled in pretty well. He's relatively young also, only 25 years old. If you can bring him back cheap, I'd be all for that. Solomon Thomas, decent player, good depth. Just didn't see enough from him. I don't see him coming back. Joe Flacco, time for him to go. Nathan Shepard, some good moments this year. Again, solid player. Am I going to overpay for him? Absolutely not. LDT, another depth guy. James Robinson, restricted free agent. I don't see him coming back, considering 4 other running backs passed him on the depth chart last year. Vinny Curry, he could possibly be retiring. The big question comes down to Bryce Huff. Do you tender him a first-round tender, which I think is a little over $5 million. Second round, I think it's about $4 million. Or you could do, they can't do the original round tender, but I guess they could do the one where they have right of first refusal, which I think is a little over $2 million. I have a feeling you'll see the Jets possibly tender him around $4 million, where they could get a second round pick back. I think if they do the right of first refusal, which is a little over $2 million, you might get somebody that actually gives him a decent contract off the flashes that he's shown. So that's something to monitor there. Zerline, he was pretty consistent. I can see him back. Jeff Smith, solid special teamer. Wouldn't have an issue bringing him back. And then Mike White, listen, I loved the story last year. I don't think you could sell bringing him back as a starter, but you want to bring him back as a possible number 2 option to compete with Zach. I don't think anybody would really complain with that. He's a crowd favorite. He's a pretty smart player, can play within the offense. It seems like the Hackett offense has some similarities to it as far as just being a West Coast offense to, what LaFleur ran. So I don't think it's going to be a huge adjustment. So we'll see what happens. But again, just the bigger picture is that I do think Joe Douglas has some flexibility to make some things happen this offseason. in addition to getting a quarterback and in addition to extending Quinnen Williams. So we'll see what happens. Have a good night. It's late. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow.